Lovely.
Great. So welcome everybody to today's CELEP Strategic Board meeting. Thank you all for coming, and just as a reminder, we've got the AGM directly after this meeting. It is on a different link, but we'll make sure that you have that link if you don't. So please do come to that as well. Just a few apologies. Councillor Roger Gough is on leave and is being substituted by Councillor Claire Bell. Welcome, Claire. Great to see you. I think this is your first CELEP board meeting, possibly?
It absolutely is. I mean, normally it would be Derek Murphy, who's the Cabinet Member for Economic Development. So I'm afraid I'm a very poor substitute, being Communities and Regulatory Services. But it's great to meet you all. Thank you.
Not at all. Community is really important to us all. So thank you. Matthew Arnold is unable to join us today. Councillor Tony Cox is being substituted by Councillor John Lamb. John, welcome to the meeting. I think you've been to one of these before.
Yes, that's right, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And Joe James, who's going to be substituted today by Andrew Metcalfe. Andrew, welcome if you're here. So thank you very much. Sorry, I can't see you on my screen at the moment, but maybe over somewhere else. I've got to flick between screens. The meeting is recorded, as you just heard from Kerry. Just to remind you that it will be recorded and that members of the public can, of course, attend to today and listen in on today's meeting. The normal rules of Zoom apply, so please could you keep yourself muted unless you're except when speaking. If you want to speak, please could you either raise your virtual hand or your real hand so that I can see it, and I will try to get to you in order of the raised hands. And please can you not use the chat function, as this can't be seen and it's not publicly accessible. If we're going to move to votes on anything, I will ask people to raise their hands and then lower their hands so that we can be really clear on all of the votes and crystal clear on the number of votes. So thank you very much for that. So let's move on swiftly to the minutes and declarations of interest and matters arising. Item 2, are you all happy with the minutes from the July meeting? And do you agree that they're an accurate record? Great. I see no. Thank you. I see no dissension, so thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest for today's meeting, please? I can't see any. And just a reminder, please, that you do need to keep your register of interest form up to date, which is also published on the CELEP website. So please do that. Very important, that transparency. I don't think we have any public questions to address. I think on terms of matters arising, firstly, I just want to note that Matthew Arnold has stepped down as the director of CELEP board due to new commitments. And Matthew was unfortunately unable to join us today, but we'd really like to give our sincere thanks to him for all of his work on the board and to his dedication to the LEP. I'm delighted to say that he's continuing on with KMEP, so it's great that he will still feed into that federated board. David Millam from the Federation of Small Businesses has been nominated by KMEP to replace Matthew, and he's kindly joined us as an observer today, and obviously will be making decisions about the new members in December's meeting. So lastly, we have a quick update from the accountable body in relation to the CELEP audit. So Michael, if I can ask you to speak on the audit, please.
Thank you, Sarah. We had intended to bring the 22-23 CELEP accounts for review to this meeting. However, unfortunately, the audit itself was not concluded in time for this. But we have now received confirmation of the audit, and the good news is there were no concerns to raise to the board. We now intend to bring the accounts for consideration to the board meeting in December, where the board will be afforded the opportunity to ask any questions. But we continue to provide regular updates on the 23-24 position of CELEP to the accountable board. The last one was at the September meeting.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any questions or comments? We look forward to receiving the details of the audit, and thank you to the accountable body, again at Essex County Council, for continuing to keep such a careful watch on everything. We are really grateful. Okay, so let's move on to item 3. Helen Russell, I'm going to hand over to you on the draft integration paper, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just going to take you through a short presentation on the integration plan. So I'm just going to try and share my screen and hope that that works successfully. Can I just ask if you can see that okay?
I can, yes.
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. So yes, just going to take you through this short presentation of the plan. Obviously, you've had that in your pack. I just wanted to note firstly that this is a draft, and therefore all aspects of the plan are subject to sort of further detail and clarity as we evolve the plan over the coming weeks. Secondly, just to note that the work to date has focused very much on the identification of functions, tasks and timescales, and therefore largely at present is addressing the sort of the mechanics, if you like, of what needs to happen in order to integrate LEP functions into local authorities going forward. So just to note those to sort of frame the rest of the presentation. So starting with our sort of overall aims, we believe successful integration will mean the following, which is that current CELEP accountability arrangements are concluded, with responsibilities all transferred over to upper tier local authorities. That future arrangements and processes are agreed for delivering LEP functions by local authorities in line with the government's guidance. In relation to growth hubs, that new accountable bodies are agreed and fully prepared for taking on functions that will enable the delivery of successful business services across the area. All current CELEP partnerships will have a clear future direction with support arrangements in place where agreed. That local authorities can lead in the economic analysis for their area with ongoing access to LEP information and an agreed archive in place where this is needed. That local authorities have the resources that they need and require to undertake the work going forward. And finally, that obviously the CELEP Limited would be closed with all the required decisions and actions having been taken. So that's sort of where we're aiming for. But in terms of our progress to date, following the board decision in July, we've established 5 work streams that cover the core elements of LEP functions, these being governance and capital programme, growth and hub and business support, partnerships and network, and data and intelligence, and also a sort of wraparound work stream regarding resourcing. So over a 6-week period during August and early September, facilitated by the LEP team, we've held 11 workstream meetings with over 50 officers involved at various points, which was certainly no mean feat, especially over the summer holidays. So in terms of the progress we've made during that, which is set out obviously in more detail and more thematically in the plan itself, the progress is broadly around understanding and articulating all the areas for consideration. So, in layman's terms, what's in the mix, building a shared understanding between all of the parties of the functions to be integrated and the required tasks and timelines involved in making that happen. Identifying risks, assumptions and dependencies that exist that may, particularly those that may have a bearing on the ability to reach the deadline that we're working to. Linked to this, we've started to build understanding of the critical path towards the 31st of March to really understand what those key points are. We've identified preferred approaches, future approaches that local authorities wish to take post-April 24, and particularly detailed those that require either government and/or local decision-making in order to take forward. We've identified legal advice and capacity that is needed to support us through the process. And lastly, we've also submitted a response to government where further clarifications on the guidance that they issued on the 4th of August has been needed. So that's where we've got to in terms of some of our progress. But just to sort of pick up the point about the government's guidance, that, as I say, we didn't receive until some of our workstream meetings had started. And I won't labour this because I've just picked out some high points, because you're probably high-level points, because you're probably familiar with it. But basically, outside of devolved areas, government's been clear that expects LEP functions to be exercised by the respective upper tier authorities, and that those authorities will work together within potential devolution deal geographies, and by that defining that as sort of functional economic areas with a population of over 500,000. It sets out LEP functions to be integrated as defined in kind of three broad headings, really. One is around business representation, which is around the creation or continued engagement with an economic growth board made up of local business leaders and representative bodies. And there are guiding principles provided in the guidance around this, but very much in alignment to the structures of the federated boards that the LEP has had or continues to have. Secondly, around strategic economic planning. This is the production or update of economic strategies which would support local decision making and potentially underpin future bids for government funding. And thirdly, the delivery of government programmes where required and directed, which historically, obviously from a LEP perspective, has been things like the capital programme and growth hubs, but yet to be defined going forward. So the guidance in August did state that further guidance would be available for local authorities, and that would be provided in January next year, although we do believe there is a chance that we may receive it earlier than that, which would certainly be most welcome. Lastly, the guidance made a point that the sort of residual LEP activity, such as the management of the capital programme, for example, should reside with the existing accountable body, who should subsume any loan books and remain responsible for ongoing monitoring requirements. So that's broadly what the guidance stated. So as we digested these, it was agreed that further clarifications were needed, and we also might need to seek alternative arrangements to some of the points made in the guidance. So whilst the submission to government sort of set out a number of specific questions around this, and that's already been put forward, we've captured this for the sake of today in sort of three broad points, really. So firstly, the accountable body. The Essex County Council, as the accountable body, and the other local authorities agree that it's not really practical or desirable for one accountable body to remain across the CELEP area from next year onwards, particularly once the LEP has closed and its governance arrangements have ceased. So it's requested that government will agree to the local authorities becoming their own accountable bodies from April 24. And we've also asked for clarity on the expectations of what government expects of an accountable body going forward. And this partly links to the second point, which is around the assurance framework. So the guidance states that the assurance framework will remain in place up until a reasonable point before integration and should be adhered to for as long as it is applicable. So we have asked for clarification on what a reasonable point might be considered to be, and also what, if the national assurance framework will cease, what framework, if any, will local authorities need to comply with going forward if devolution deals are not in place by the end of March, because the only other framework I believe that is cited in the guidance is the English devolution framework. So lastly, around growth hubs, the guidance very clearly states that they expect seamless growth hub provision to be provided. And so therefore, as you would expect of us, we have sought urgent clarification on the 24-25 funding, which is still unknown, and also obviously what the allocation per area would be to enable us to appropriately plan and prepare for that to take place. In addition to the clarifications we have put in, we are intending to imminently write to DLUC to formally gain agreement to the actions needed to enact the accountable body changes that we're seeking. And it is probably worth noting that we are not the only ones seeking alternative arrangements to that set out. We are not unique in this situation. So obviously government are working across a number of LEPs on this. So some of these further clarifications and agreements, obviously, as you'll appreciate, are quite critical to be able to reach our future proposed position for the delivery of LEP functions. And whilst there's a more detailed table in the plan itself, this slide just focuses on what that sort of proposed position going forward looks like, or is proposed to look like. So under its broad headings around the capital programme, it's proposed that the management of LGF, GBF and GPF are undertaken by the respective local authorities for their own projects. And this will mean each authority having accountable body status and reporting directly to government where required on their live projects. For the Growth Hub, moving away from the sort of hub and spoke model, obviously with Essex as the account and the LEP as the accountable body, we would have 3 independent growth hubs across Greater Essex, Kenton, Medway and East Sussex. Each of these again would have their own accountable body status for the administration of funding and reporting directly to government on performance. As you know, CELEP currently provides secretariat to a number of partnerships across the region at varying levels, and it is proposed that the CKEN major projects and housing development groups in particular are offered continued secretariat by a local authority to be able to continue as regional groups going forward. CELEP is also currently a member of the Greater South East Net Zero Hub Board, which is a very long title, and it's proposed that an individual from one of the local authorities will represent the whole area and replace CELEP on that board, as that board is also evolving its governance arrangements at this present time. So it's being suggested that all of this around the partnerships initially is for a 12-month period, because that will enable the kind of integration and future ways of working to really embed and really allow more discussions with those groups about what a future model looks like. For the remaining groups that exist currently at the CELEP level, there are differing approaches emerging, with some potentially continuing to operate independently of any sort of local authority support, and others shifting to more local structures as that makes sense. Lastly, in terms of resourcing, it's proposed that appropriate CELEP resources will transition to local authorities to support the delivery of integrated LEP functions and obviously potentially wider economic growth work within the local authorities. So in parallel to working towards this overall position through the evolving integration plan, work will be ongoing to review the CELEP budget, its reserves, to gain a clear view on the likely 24-25 budget requirements, also identifying what, if any, residual activity will need to take place post-April that would need to be resourced, and as such, what funds might be available, therefore, to support local authorities in integrating LEP functions. So another key area of the plan and the work done to date has been around identifying risk. I won't labour these in the spirit of time, as they are detailed in the plan and the paper, but they largely sit around the kind of timely receipt of clarification and agreement with government on some key aspects that we've covered. Also around capacity, both within the CELEP Secretariat, the accountable body, and within the local authorities. Noting, for example, that the LEP Secretariat has reduced by more than a further 20% just in the last 6 months. So this does present challenges to being able to work at the pace that we're seeking. Also to note that progress is dependent on agreement as to future geographical coverage with new accountable body arrangements, as well as obviously the local authorities being able to undertake their required actions and decision makings ahead of what is planned to be the final strategic board in March. And notwithstanding, of course, that they're still awaiting that guidance in January and funding confirmation from government, which we have to believe may have a bearing on the plan and the intentions as they currently stand. Lastly, just to highlight one thing, the plan also talks about a number of assumptions that we're making at this stage, which I haven't listed here, but maybe the most pertinent to directors might be the one that very much assumes that the CELEP boards remain quorate during all of this time and therefore can take all the necessary decisions to execute and complete this plan. So just before I move on to next steps, I wanted to note that whilst over the previous few weeks, we have focused a lot on understanding, if you like, the job to do to secure a smooth and timely transition, and what, as I said, the mechanics really are of that to achieve the deadline we're working to. But I wanted to reassure the board that the principles that were agreed in July at the board meeting remain very much in place and are a key collective focus of our work over the coming weeks as we finalise the plan and really work to understand what comes next. So we do appreciate at this stage the plan has mainly addressed the kind of functional and proposed delivery model aspects and doesn't get into the kind of structures under which work is steered and governed in future, which would include, for example, the role of economic growth or business boards. But of course, also to mention that there are local plans being developed in each of the areas that will dovetail with this CELEP plan, and obviously that they will also articulate those in more detail as we progress. So There is a critical path chart in the plan, which obviously is more detailed, but I just wanted to highlight a few of the Q3 ones that are on our kind of path to the 31st of March. Which is, as we've discussed, the agreement and decisions on accountable body status. It's pretty crucial that we have those made in this quarter to enable them to be enacted January onwards. That we have the agreement and the development of the approach around the growing places funding, which is obviously on our agenda for today. Decisions are made by local authorities around growth hub delivery models and the aligned accountable body arrangements. The commencement of a formal staff consultation. Obviously, there is a statutory timeline to that. And lastly, the confirmation of our transition arrangements for that net zero hub. So there's more detail, as I say, in that chart in the plan, but they're just some of the key ones. So next steps, my last slide here, just to say that obviously the LEP and local authority officers will continue to refine and develop the plan over the coming weeks, working with partners. We'll also continue to work with DLUC to gain those clarifications and agreements that are needed to take the work forward. We aim that the final plan will articulate the work completed and the decisions made to date, so it is clear what has already taken place. As well as the specific tasks that are still to undertake and the timelines needed to achieve those. And of course, the remaining decisions, risks and implications for that critical path. And that final plan will obviously be brought to the next December meeting of this board for agreement. So that is all from me on the plan itself. Before I just hand back to you, Chair, if I may, I would just like to take the opportunity to note a big thank you to the team who have worked extremely hard over the recent weeks to put this plan together on top of their business as usual work. And I'd also like to extend a thank you to the local authority officers who've actively engaged with us in a really, really positive and pragmatic way, again, which has enabled us to get this plan to where it is in such a short space of time. So thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. You've taken the words right out of my mouth about the thank yous to the staff and to the senior officer group at the local authorities and indeed the local authorities themselves. So, I mean, as you can hear, as you've heard, there's a huge amount, and seen in your board packs, there's a huge amount of work going on in an incredibly short amount of time. And it's really important to us all that we both continue the values and the principles of CELEP, and that we hand over an orderly exit and one that gives a real legacy for all of the incredible work, and we share our learning. Before I open it up to discussion, I thought I would ask Greg, who's very kindly here from DLUC, whether he is able to give us any further update from the government's point of view. You can see that there is various dependencies, as Helen outlined, various questions that are really fundamental to us being able to do this in the timescale that we need to do it. So Greg, are you able to give us, thank you for coming firstly, and are you able to give us any update?
Thanks, Sarah. And I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you very much to Helen and the rest of the team, and again to officials at local authorities for the work on this. It's been really appreciated by the department and noted the collaborative spirit in which this is being done and the quick progress that is being made to work out post-transition arrangements. So thank you very much to all the local authorities and to the LEP for the work that's been going on in this area so far. I don't have much of an update to give. It's been really helpful to see the response from the LEP and the issues fed in by local authorities in response to the guidance that was issued previously. As Helen outlined, there's further guidance that will be made available to local authorities by January 2024. But in the meantime, we're continuing to work through issues one by one that's raised to us in the CELEP region, and appreciate your continued patience as we work through through these. Obviously, we're looking over a large geography and lots of different types of LEP formation. So each one is individual and quite complex. I've got one point of clarification just to raise that I've heard from the LEP team this morning on the accountability framework, as that's one of the points that Helen raised about at what point the national local growth accountability framework will be phased out, and the English devolution accountability framework will become applicable. The clarification point is just on the areas which are in negotiation for a devolution settlement or might not be in the process of negotiating a devolution deal. And the team at the moment is working on a new accountability framework for areas that are in the negotiation process or won't be subject to a devolution deal. So that will be in place for local authorities to take over from the National Local Growth Accountability Framework. So where the English devolution accountability framework won't be applicable to those areas as it currently stands, and there will be an update to that. Hopefully I'll be able to provide a bit more clarity on that when it's been through our central clearance processes. That's all that I've got to update on this morning. Helen and I continue to have weekly meetings on this, so please do feed in to me or her if you have any further points that you'd like raised with the central team, and we'll continue to feed those in and update when we can.
Thanks, Greg. I know it's an ever-changing situation at the moment. So, I mean, I think one of the things that we're really keen is that we understand that the guidance is going to be going to the local authorities, but actually we're still here as a LEP at the moment. So any guidance you can give the LEP as well as the local authorities, I think would be really important. So thank you for that, and thank you for working with us on all of this. I also then just wanted to invite the local authority leaders to kind of give us a brief progress update from your point of view in terms of the LEP integration. So if that's all right with you, I'll sort of go around and ask Kevin, Councillor Bentley, you took your microphone off first, so I'll come to you. So thank you very much, Councillor Bentley.
Thank you very much indeed. No, Kevin, please. I always say my parents didn't spend a long time coming up with the name to come up with the name Councillor. On the other hand, they did name Kevin, so they're not all forgiven.
Okay.
So from our point of view, and first of all, I just want to echo the amount of work being done. It's never easy winding up something that's been in existence for a long time with lots of good relationships, and just the professionalism of this has been outstanding. So thank you, and Helen particularly, thank you leading that team. So in Essex, we are very much into a level 2 devolution. We were given the nod on that about 4.5 weeks ago, and we have been progressing that very rapidly with the 2 upper tier authorities in Essex, Southend and Thurrock, but also involving all of our districts and also the PFCC, as we have here, which is the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. To the extent where we are just now finalising the deal text. We've also been working strongly with businesses. So we did have 2 federated areas in Essex that's come together under the Greater Essex Business Board, and actually I think got it into a position which we really are very comfortable with, which in terms of some of the larger strategic businesses which were missing from those federated boards, in my honest opinion, and involving the chambers and SMEs as well. So there's a better mix, a richer mix, I think, of businesses around the table, and involving some of our bigger logistical organisations such as the airports and the free ports and other ports that we have in this Greater Essex area. So all that together, everyone's been fully briefed, kept on board, everyone has a say on this. Today, it's a good day to be having this discussion because we are now sitting down and having a discussion on the governance, because that is very important in order to get the final green light on the deal with the government, and that will be done. That is around voting rights, which always, you know, potentially sounds a bit dull, but is critically important. It feels like 13 years ago when we sat down and started talking about formation of CELEP. It's just kind of a rerun of that, but it's working very well, I have to say. And I'm going down into John's patch this afternoon, back into glorious Southend, where I hope the sun will be shining. And we'll be having that meeting with the upper tier authorities and also with the PFCC to work out that. And from that, we foresee this with the LEP competencies being transferred to the combined authority. Now, what is important is the districts are involved in that currently into the LEP, and so they would be in future as well. And therefore, they would have a seat at the table. We're just discussing about who gets what vote, but a seat around the table along with the PFCC as well. From my point of view, having been kicking around for quite a long time, I have never known such close collaboration in Greater Essex between all authorities, and that is to be really welcomed. We're all here for one reason, that's to serve the public. There is no other reason we exist other than to do that, and I really get a strong sense of that happening here in Greater Essex. So there will be everything you've outlined, that Helen outlined in her report about the governance arrangements, a proper place to transfer money and the competencies too of the LEP will be there, will be in place, and in Essex we're ready to go on that basis. And should the government think that's all okay and give us the green light, we hope in the November autumn statement of November 22nd, the Chancellor will announce Essex as a place of devolution.
Thank you, Kevin. Very good to hear from you, and good to hear what progress is being made. Councillor Bell, if I may.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, bear with me. So from County Council's point of view, so we are preparing the integration activity based on the information in the August government guidance, which specifies a county-wide geography or an area with a population of more than 500,000. And as such, we're working on the basis of a Kent and Medway geography in all of our planning. Officers have been fully integrated into the 5 work streams coordinated by LEP, and our economy team is leading on the work with support from finance, legal and HR teams. Our Growth, Economic Development and Communities Cabinet Committee was supportive of Kent County Council taking on LEP responsibilities next year, and a formal decision will be taken next week by our Cabinet Member for Economic Development, Derek Murphy. We have drafted a Kent and Medway integration plan, which we discussed with Medway Council and shared this with KMEP last week, who were supportive of the direction of travel. We are clear on the main issues, such as becoming the accountable body for capital programmes, ensuring that businesses are fully engaged in the transition process and future plans, the continuation of the Kent and Medway Growth Hub, and finalising our local economic strategy to underpin future work. And just finally, I'd say we are now working through details such as staffing and resourcing requirement, KMEP's role and structure going forward, and considering the practical arrangements necessary to be ready for the formal handover of responsibilities next year. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to KCC as well for the work. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. I'd echo comments. Certainly I've heard from officers that the integration discussions through the work streams have been really good. Maple has been clear that although we want extra powers, we want extra funding, we're not interested in the current devolution options that are being proposed by government, and would prefer to wait for the more potentially bespoke devolution deal that may be available if we get a future Labour government. So that's the position that we're in at the moment on devolution. I would say we've had some very productive discussions with KCC on integration, which Claire has covered, particularly around working together on the continuation of the growth hubs in Kent and Medway, and also continuing to have KMEP operate as that voice for business in the region, and that we want to be involved with very closely developing the kind of economic picture for the region. In terms of future governance for instance, local growth fund, we obviously want to become our own accountable body for ongoing LGF projects. The rationale is obviously that we already report directly to government on other schemes, so we want to be able to continue to do that and not add an extra layer of reporting, which we don't think is needed. Similarly, we want to take on responsibility for GBF projects as well. And one of the things that we are also very interested in is having as much flexibility as an upper tier local authority in how funds are spent. So, for instance, having the flexibility around capital or revenue expenditure in order to deliver the growth that I think is obviously needed. We think it's appropriate that we're, as our own accountable body, we're able to make our own decisions and report to government. And in terms of our governance, we're intending to take a paper to Cabinet to delegate authority to be able to make the kind of decisions at pace that we know we need to do to meet the March 2024 deadline.
Thank you very much. Very good to hear that too. Councillor Gazer.
Thank you. East Sussex has made resources available across all of the departments, including our finance, HR and legal teams, to ensure full engagement in each of the work streams. We've also engaged with Team East Sussex to provide updates, ensuring that businesses, HE, FE and our borough and district colleagues are all kept in the loop. We set out a clear timeline for the local approvals process, ensuring that both the draft and the final versions of the CELEP integration plan receive the approval of our corporate management team, cabinet and full council. The last of these is scheduled to take place in early February next year, so will be fully concluded ahead of the March CELEP strategic board meeting. The schedule also includes Team East Sussex engagement throughout. East Sussex officers are now working on an East Sussex integration plan, arranging for the activities of the CELEP plan into the county specific actions, and a first draft of that will be ready by the end of this month. And in terms of risks identified in relation to the Growth Hub, in East Sussex, we've already moved the service in-house so that we've already mitigated the risks behind and in the gap of business support services. Also, government guidance is clear that they encourage upper tier local authorities to create or continue to engage with the Economic Growth Board or similar, made up of local business leaders and relevant representative bodies, in order to provide the view of local business as part of the regional decision making, and to work with local leaders to create the broad economic strategy for the area. Before the transition work even began, East Sussex, we agreed that Team East Sussex will continue to operate beyond the life of CELEP as the strategic economic growth board for the county, and we're already working together on a new economic growth strategy for 2024. I'm very pleased that Emma Smith, our Deluxe lead, attended this week's Team East Sussex board meeting, and she commented that the arrangements we have in place and the arrangement we had in place and the proactive way that we and both Team East Sussex and at CELEP have worked to ensure a smooth transition. So, and on devolution, there's nothing that East Sussex see is potentially advantageous currently. So we will sit and wait and see what tier 2 deals look like.
Thanks, Councillor Glazer. Okay, and Councillor Lamb, please.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. And Kevin's already outlined a lot that's already happening with ourselves and Essex and so on, so I won't go through that. But of course, we're working very hard, and again, like to put our thanks from Southend on to Helen and all her team, but also onto our own officers and all the local officers who work so hard on this. I mean, we've got the actual various streams of work that have now been agreed and going through, and we're working through those on cross-cutting areas. We're looking at the devolution of going through that, and there's a lot of work, and we see some of this, of course, passing with the devolution because we're going for a level 2, as Kevin outlined. And literally, there's a lot moving forward, and it's very good to see, because unfortunately, we all know the LEP's going to come to an end. Local authorities are going to pick up that work. We are literally prepared to take that on board, and I know that in fact we're waiting that with the devolution discussion, the progress in this will then move forward to make sure that we're getting all the responsibilities and accountabilities that we should be picking up under the LEP system. So everything, as far as we're concerned, is moving very smoothly, albeit there are some concerns because there are some hiccups from government, as we know. where we don't get the answers necessarily as speedily as we would like. And it's that decision making. They need to be more business-like in coming to that and passing that on to us. So as far as that's concerned, we're very pleased with where we're moving, but also with the way we're all working together on the local authorities. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. I don't believe that anyone is here from representing Thurrock in terms of the local authority, but as Councillor Lamb and Councillor Kevin I won't call you councillor anymore, said, you know, we've heard the position from Essex quite well, so thank you for that. Okay, sorry to take all of that, but I thought it was really important that board members had the overall picture as much as possible. So I can open it up for discussion and any questions from anybody. Are there any? Simon, and then Carol.
Thanks, Sarah. I know this is complicated, but just listening to all of the feedback and the progress that we've made, I just wonder whether one of the things that could be a potential risk for us is whether or not we have a view on this, I guess, really is my question. Government guidance could get in the way of this, actually. We've done a lot of work. There's been a lot of work to progress what is a fairly orderly transition. Would we take a view that we would ignore government guidance going forward if it had a disrupting effect on that progress that's been made so far, particularly in the context of the fact that there isn't that much time between now and March?
An interesting question, Simon. Okay, let's Helen, did you put your hand up to respond to that question, or was it?
I mean, I can give a response, but obviously we could move on and then maybe answer questions at the end.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, Carol, and then Councillor Lamb. Thanks.
Yeah, it's probably covered. I'm just looking at the milestones in terms of actually, you know, which are very helpful in the appendix. So thank you very much, Helen and the team, for producing that. I think that's really helpful. I suppose I've got two questions really on that. Are there plan B? So it's kind of links into what Simon just said with regard to the critical dependencies and milestones. And importantly, I think within that is the resourcing piece within that, because I note on there that there is the consultation and the process of the consultation and the move of new roles, etc. I'm just concerned, obviously, with the resourcing that you have, with the work you have to do with this and the ongoing work that you have to do. Has that started? Has the process started for that? Is that in hand? Is that being taken care of? And my bigger question, I suppose, on it is what happens? What's the plan B? Should a critical dependency or milestone, i.e. the red boxes, not be met?
Thanks, Carol. Okay, and then let's go to Councillor Lamb, and then we'll start.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It's just on what Simon said. I'm a believer that, hang on, government have given us an objective that where we should go to, whether or not we all agree with it in the first place, that's where we're moving to. So if government don't come across with it, then let's move forward and let's deliver it. And don't wait for them to come up. Let's tell them what we want and let's tell them where we're going. If we don't do that, then in fact, we're going to actually stall. And that's not what we need. It's not what our businesses need. We need clarity and we need to move that forward. And I think we now have an end game plan where we're moving to. Let's make it happen and then say to government, well, you didn't come up with it, but there you are, it's done. And if you want to change it, then you come back and tell us.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. I think I personally would agree with that statement, that as long as we're working within the assurance framework that we have as much as possible, as long as we're doing due diligence and keeping along the lines that we were set up to deliver, then absolutely the orderly exit that we should work towards is the one that we set ourselves in the last board meeting. So thank you. Helen, did you want to come in on a couple of these things?
Hi, yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's which order to say this, I guess. I mean, I think there's an awful lot of work that we can continue to do sort of outside of you know, anything sort of further forthcoming from government at the moment. I think and there are accountable bodies on the call if I'm misunderstanding this, but I think that the critical part of it that I'm not sure we we can sort of not do without them, if you like, is we would need DLUC to release Essex County Council of its accountable body status, because if that doesn't happen, then Essex County Council remain, you know, they have that ongoing responsibility, and I don't think that's something that we can ignore. We have to come to that agreement with government. I mean, I can't speak for DLUC or Greg on the call, of course, but I'm not getting the impression that that will be an insurmountable hurdle. I think it's a timing point as much as anything. Greg might be disagreeing, he's just put his hand up. So I don't see that. I don't see it being a problem, but the timeliness of understanding these things is potentially a challenge for us with the deadline that we have, that we are working to, which is the deadline that government want us to work to. So I think that to me is the crucial bit that we really need government for. The further guidance and clarifications, if you like, I would agree with Sarah and others. I think as long as we are working with our assurance framework and with what we collectively agree and want to do, I think we can, for want of a expression, crack on with that. But I do think there are, and those further clarifications will hopefully just help when they come. But again, we can push back on those if they are not in line with what we want to do, because we have good reason for the way we've set out our plan. But there is that critical thing, I think, of the Essex County Council and the accountable body responsibilities, and we do need them for that. In terms of your point, Carol, quickly, in terms of plan B, I'm not sure there is an entire plan B, but we are monitoring obviously the dependencies and risks very closely. The team itself is working in an, I know it sounds an odd thing to say because you'd expect us to, but we're very much owning this as a team, not just dealing with our own areas of the work. So we are supporting each other through that. Obviously we are a small team, and it's a difficult time for the team, so we all acknowledge that, but we all are very proud and committed of the work that we've done at the LEP for a number of years, and there is that dedication to making sure that we see it through to its proper transition. And also the case for obviously local authorities. You know, capacity isn't necessarily a plenty in local authorities either, so it is a risk that we are managing. And we'll continue to do so. But I think as the weeks, we haven't got an awful lot of time before the end of March, really. And so as the weeks tick on, obviously we will make as much progress as we can, hence therefore mitigating some of that risk as we go. So I hope that helped to answer the questions. Maybe it's good to bring Greg in. I don't know if he's got a particular point linked to the...
It was just on Simon's point, and to build on your point, Helen, to say completely agree with what you've said on the accountable body points, where there's agreed geographies, and that's in line with the guidance that's been set out by government on functional economic areas or potential future combined authorities. We'll be happy with that, and there are specific circumstances, but we can partially relating to Councillor Lamb's original comments about appreciate that the guidance isn't always very clear in points, but that does allow a degree of flexibility for arrangements to be put in place which suit your area, and we're not going to have left those open and flexible for you to do what you want, only to make them incredibly restrictive and not fit in with your transition plans, and then for you not to be able to do those within the time permitted. So yeah, on the accountable body point, we'll work with you further on releasing Essex from that accountable body role and transferring that to the agreed geography, so long as that's in line with the guidance. But I think you're completely right on the transition plans moving in the right direction. It's in line with the guidance released so far, and yes, there'll be further guidance released to local authorities in the future, and part of that is about the funding point, which I appreciate it is quite an important quantum to be fixed down in this discussion, but I think the direction of travel is correct at this point.
Thank you, Greg. I'm just going to bring in Michael, because I thought maybe you were talking from an accountable body point of view to say something. So, and then I'll come to you, Christine.
Thank you, Sarah. We are fully committed to meeting the deadline of the end of March 2024. But just to reiterate Gregory and Helen's point, the key decision is around releasing ECC as the accountable body status. But just another word of caution, we will have to fully consider any guidance provided by government. We are currently awaiting clarification on some of the guidance issued earlier, but the full position would need to be considered once we know what it is. If we are unable to close down by the 31st of March, we would need to consider CELEP resource to continue to fund us into 2024. So that would be the key point there. Thank you.
Thank you. Really important points. Thank you. Councillor Bayliss.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for bringing me in. I just wanted to say, as a sort of district and district representatives on this board, that we have been fully involved with Team East Sussex and the arrangements, certainly in East Sussex, around the future going forward. And I would like to thank our colleagues at East Sussex County Council for that. I mean, it is really important for districts to be involved in this conversation. I mean, in the last 6 months alone, Rother District Council, which I'm a member of, has been awarded £59 million worth of government funding. We've just recently had £20 million worth of Towns Fund allocated to us. We're a levelling up partnership. Well, this is all money that is coming direct to us, not being funneled through East Sussex County Council. So it is really important, I think, for our unitary authority colleagues to bear that in mind. On I did have a question of Helen around risks. Have we factored in a change of government into our risks? I don't think the Labour Party has got any sort of more recent policy on LEPs, but I mean, its existing policy on LEPs is very, very supportive. And I just wonder if we've given any thought to how that might play out if there was a general election, say in January, February, and there was a change of government.
Hello.
Can I comment? It isn't. You're quite right, Councillor Bates. It isn't cited as a risk in the document. It has been discussed, not at length, if I'm really honest, but it has been discussed as a potential, maybe not so much as a risk, but just to discuss its potential implications, I guess. And I think that's and not sort of fully understanding what those implications might be, I think is partly why we didn't sort of cite it as a particular risk. From my understanding, if it was if a general election was to happen and a different administration was to come in, I think from what we understand, there's unlikely to be any kind of change of direction in terms of what we're planning towards now. And I think that's probably why we haven't cited it. But it's a fair point, and maybe it is something we should give a bit more thought to over the coming weeks as we finalise that plan.
Thank you. Okay. Unless there are any other comments or questions, thank you all very much for this really useful discussion and this update. And I just actually want to pay particular tribute to Helen and the staff team at the LEP, who, I mean, Helen's only just relatively recently taken over the role of chief exec and has done the most incredible job. It has been an absolute joy to continue to work with you, Helen, on all of this, and to the staff team, who under considerable, not only is it a reduced staff team, who are continuing to manage and monitor the significant programmes that we are already running, also have to work on this significant exit plan. So a huge thank you to me, and I'm sure from us all, to you Helen, and to the team, and also to the senior officers at all of the local authorities, and of course to the accountable body without whom none of this would be possible. So a huge thank you from me. So if we are happy, are you happy to agree the draft CELEP integration plan and its development into a final integration plan by December 2023? Can I see your hands, please? Okay, great. Thank you very much. And that we should all note, as we have been discussing, the risk and dependencies highlighted in this paper and the integration plan. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to item 4, the options for the use of GPF. So I'm going to hand over now to Helen Dyer.
Thank you. So, as you are all aware, the Growing Places Fund currently operates as a revolving loan scheme which is managed by LEP. Obviously, given the plans to integrate LEP activities into local authorities, it's clear that a new approach to deploying and managing the GPF funding moving forward needs to be established. This report sets out options related to the future deployment of the GPF funding for the board to consider. The review of options for use of the GPF funding has been informed by 3 underlying assumptions. Firstly, it has been assumed that full repayment of the existing GPF loans will be made, with repayments due in 23-24 being made to Essex County Council as the accountable body, and future repayments being made to either the incoming accountable body or relevant upper tier local authority, depending upon the option chosen. Secondly, it has been assumed that following receipt of technical guidance, no further approvals with regard to the use of the GPF will be required from government. And finally, it has been assumed that there will be a desire by all parties to achieve the best level of financial parity possible when considering the future use of the funding. So, as set out in the report, the review has concluded that there are 2 broad options for use of the funding, albeit with 3 sub-options attached to option 2. So I appreciate that there is a lot of detail in the report, so I'm going to try and keep this as simple as possible, but can't make any promises. Option 1 provides the opportunity to retain the GPF as a regional loan programme by inviting a partner authority to manage the fund as an ongoing loan scheme to span the LEP legacy area. This option has the advantage of retaining the revolving nature of the fund and continues to allow the fund to function across the entire LEP region. In addition, it removes the requirement to consider how existing GPF loans should be managed, as they would be transferred to the new lead partner authority. However, there are a number of complexities attached to this option, including a need to establish new governance processes to manage the fund, a likely need to establish a new LEP-wide board to consider applications for funding, management of costs associated with running the scheme, and a variation in appetite for loan funding across the LEP region. It is likely that the process to implement this option would be lengthy and would require a significant amount of work. So, in broad terms, option 2 proposes a disaggregation of the GPF funding to allow areas to adopt a localised approach to the use of the funding. The report has been based on the assumption that funding will be disaggregated at an upper tier local authority level. However, in light of the technical guidance from government, it is recommended that consideration is given to combining the GPF funding within potential devolution deal geographies or functional economic areas to create a fund which has the potential to offer greater benefit to the local economy. The grant conditions specified by government at the outset of the GPF programme stated that the funding could only be used to support capital expenditure, and therefore under option 2, this requirement would be passed on when releasing the funding. Under this option, the fund would take on a more local basis, but there's a strong expectation that the funding would continue to be used for economic growth purposes and that local authorities would continue to seek input from businesses when determining local priorities and use of the funding. There are 3 key weaknesses to option 2. This option is likely to limit the regional strategic impact of the fund, as it will be broken down into smaller pots and shared across the whole area. It may also result in a loss of the revolving loan fund function. However, the biggest challenge with this option is the ability to achieve financial parity across all local partner authorities. Given the significant disparity in the value of the GPF loans currently issued across the LEP area, as set out in Table 1 of the report, it is important that these loans are taken into account when considering a disaggregated if true financial parity is to be achieved. As outlined in the report, it's proposed that under this option, the funding will be disaggregated on a per capita basis, with adjustments being made to take into account existing GPF loans. As set out in Tables 3 and 4 of the report, adoption of this approach in isolation does not allow financial parity to be achieved due to East Sussex County Council in scenario 1 and Kent County Council in both scenarios currently holding GPF loans which total to a greater value than their per capita share of the funding. Whilst it should be noted that there is an outstanding accountability board decision in relation to the Barnham Green Commercial and Health Development project, the board may wish to accept the total carry has not been achieved and continue on that basis, allowing the transfer of the GPF funding to be completed in March or April 2024. This is represented by option 2A in the report. However, should there be a desire to achieve total parity, there are two other options set out in the report which could be considered. Option 2B offers the opportunity to investigate the possibility of implementing agreements with those local authority areas which are in receipt of more than their per capita share of the GPF funding to secure the remaining balance of each authority's per capita share. Receipt of the remaining funding by local authority partners would be subject to repayments being received against the existing GPF loans in future years. And just to be clear, the responsibility for implementing these agreements would sit with upper tier local authorities, as CELEP Limited and Essex County Council, as a current accountable body, would not be party to the agreements. Option 2C outlines the potential for the GPF loan agreements for those areas which are in receipt of more than their per capita share of the funding to remain with Essex County Council as current accountable body for CELEP, rather than transfer to the upper tier local authority. This would require repayments to continue to be made to Essex County Council, with the repayments being used by Essex County Council to achieve parity. Once parity had been achieved, the agreements would be transferred to the upper tier local authority. There are challenges with this approach, as it would require ongoing accountable body support at least into 24-25, but probably for longer, and would require Essex County Council to retain some responsibilities as accountable body beyond the closure of CELEP. It should be noted that none of the options outlined in the report fully comply with the requirements of the CELEP assurance framework. And as has already been referenced, there has been an indication from government that there is an ongoing requirement to comply with the requirements of the National Local Growth Assurance Framework throughout 23-24 for as long as the requirements are applicable. And therefore, it is unlikely that it will be possible to action either option during 23-24 unless an exemption is agreed by the Accountability Board with the endorsement of the Section 151 officer for the accountable body. Finally, just to note, it is important that a decision is taken on the preferred option for deploying the GPF funding at the earliest opportunity. As the board are aware, there is a limited time remaining to implement the transition of LEP activities, including the GPF funding. Regardless of the option chosen today, there will be a considerable amount of work required to implement the chosen option, including revisiting and revising, as applicable, existing GPF loan agreements. There are also further decisions which need to be taken by the Accountability Board, including in relation to confirming the final allocation of the funding. Time is also needed to develop an action plan and timeline for implementation of the chosen option, and this will be done in conjunction with local authority partners. I think that was all I was going to say on that report, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Helen, and thank you for all your work on it and trying to simplify what is actually a really complex situation as much as possible for us. Thank you. Questions, comments, anybody? Nothing from anybody? Kevin.
Well, I was going to say that the logical one for me is option 2A, because we just need to get this thing done, I would say. I noticed Keith's coming in next time. I have a comment about East Sussex, and maybe the Kent representative can as well. But for me, 2A is the one to go, because otherwise, certainly from the accountable body point of view, we wouldn't want to keep resourcing this way beyond the life of the LEP. So for me, it's option 2A.
Thank you, Kevin. Councillor Glazer.
Sorry, yeah, I mean, we're a bit more relaxed in 2A or 2B. We certainly don't want it to go to 2C because it does create a problem for Essex as accountable body. I think having a bit more time to totally understand those two options would be helpful, and wonder whether that could be arranged between now and the accountability board in November to just understand. But if we were forced to a vote, I would go 2A or 2B.
Thank you, Councillor Glazer. Councillor Lamb.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I also, for Southend, I think we would go for 2A. And I agree with Kevin. We need to get this done And of course, when you look at it, it does look at all the upper tier authorities, therefore being involved in this. And we're certainly keen to make sure that this actually is disintegrated right the way through to the upper level authorities. So we would go for 2A. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. I think similar to others, 2A or 2B options that we're comfortable with. I think, you know, I note under 2A, I think Medway is £175,000 worse off than under option 2B. But I think we recognise that operationally it is the more simplistic option, and we also recognise that it's also providing us with more certainty. So I think based on that and subject to the discussion, you know, I would be comfortable supporting option 2A.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so given, oh, David, thank you. Nearly called you Councillor Shepherd. You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, what I wanted, just clarification really, is we're deciding today whether it's between option 1 and option 2, whether we are looking to then make a decision on the A, B, or C, because as Councillor Bezier indicated, it's a complex area to differentiate between A and B. It probably takes more time than we've had to evaluate exactly which one likely to support. So it strikes me if we are going to vote on 1 or 2 that today, with a view to looking more detail into the implications of 2A and B, that is a simpler thing, a more straightforward thing to do today than to then go down and look at which item within option 2 we would then actually choose. So that point of clarification for me is, which of those is it? Is it 1 or 2, or are we going to look into A, B, and C today?
Helen or Helen, would you like to come in?
I don't mind coming quicker, and then Helen can correct me when I get it wrong. Probably is the better way. I think I mean, obviously, if there is only a willingness to make a decision around option 1 or 2 today, then that's what we'll have to work with. But I think ideally we would take a decision on the A, B, and C as well, for 2 reasons really. One is purely around timescales really, and our ability then, because obviously our decision making points, each time we defer it to another board, we lose time, and you know, obviously this is one part of everything else that we're trying to achieve over the coming weeks and months really. So I think ideally for that reason alone, we would prefer, if possible, a vote on the A, B, and C today, unless you're going to say something different, Helen.
No, that's pretty much exactly what I was going to say. It is, we would ideally like an A, B, or C decision, because it just gives us a little bit more time to complete the process to implement the option. Obviously, if that's not achievable, we can, as long as we've got some steer as to option 1 or 2, we can bring it back to a future meeting, but there just needs to be an awareness of that may mean that we're not able to complete the formal processes before the end of March.
Okay, thank you. So the timeline is the challenge. Councillor Glazier, then Vince Lucas, then Councillor Edwards, please.
Thank you, Jim. Just having heard those the 2 pleas from the people that are dealing with this day in day out, I'm not against 2A. So if it helps to have a vote and a clear sense of direction, I think that we would support that. So, and I can understand it totally that every day lost is twice as hard to catch up later on. So I just thought that might help.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you. Yeah, just 2 points from me really. One, just taking a slightly independent view. Key thing here is time is of the essence. We've got people in this process who need to know what's happening, and it seems a little bit incongruous if we're not having a real the real clarity, because with DLAP, we want to have the understandability. The accountable bodies are clearly split, and anything that fudges that, I think, sort of doesn't make our position clear. And the second point is this really, I strongly believe we need to operate with what's the best thing for the receiving authorities, because at this stage, they're the ones taking on the risk of this. So for me, I'll be swayed very much by what the leaders of the new accountable bodies want to do.
Thank you, Vince. Councillor Edwards, and then Liz.
Thank you. Similar, I think, to Vince. I just wanted to sort of make people aware that these options have been discussed at quite a lot of length and detail, certainly from a Kenton Medway perspective, so that we fully understand the implications of the options, just to give some people assurance that a due consideration has been given, and certainly given the time constraints, my preference would be that we do make a decision today.
Thank you. Liz.
Just to say, along with some others, that I'm aware that KCC are happy with 2A. That's all.
Thank you very much. And Kevin.
If it just helps you, Chair, I'm happy to propose 2A as the preferred option.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant timing. Okay, so if everybody is happy, are you happy to vote on option 2A, which is to disaggregate the funding on the basis of to each upper tier local authority as a total of their existing GPF loan allocations and their proportion of the funding currently held by the accountable body as exemplified in tables 3 and 4, and accept that total parity has not been achieved? Great, thank you very much for that. Now let's move on to item 5, which is the COVID Recovery Fund evaluation. As some of you will remember, we moved very swiftly during COVID to release some funds to enable our businesses to survive during that incredibly challenging time. So I'm delighted to invite Louise to kind of give us an overview of some of it, and then I'll hand over to Jo. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Hopefully, first things first, you can see my screen if everything's gone according to plan. Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, just to give you a whistle-stop tour, conscious of time, but as Sarah said, we did have some COVID-19 recovery funds that were approved by the board several years ago that myself and Jo led on. So we just thought, you've got information in your packs, but we thought it would be useful just to give you some of the highlights, really, as quite a significant area of work for the LEP and kind of some of the headlines. So just a reminder, £4.4 million worth of Growing Places Fund was approved by the board in 2020 to establish 2 COVID-19 funds, mainly in response to the challenges created by the pandemic. The board agreed that these should be deployed to support with skills development and SME recovery. So they were the areas that we felt were most in need at the time, and we presented the case and kind of evidenced it and that kind of thing. To do that, we required to set up a new framework, so a new procurement framework to procure those programmes that could also be utilised by other local authorities for similar programmes. So that was not an insignificant exercise, but a very useful exercise, and with support from our legal, finance and procurement colleagues at the accountable body. And that resulted in 6 programmes, which were to be delivered for 12 months and with 12 months for evaluation. And the 6 programmes are here, so 3 under business support and 3 under skills and employment. And they were supporting, I won't read them all out because you can do that, but they were supporting with exactly those things of supporting people into employment, with skills and with SME support. So all of them have now completed. The final spend was actually below the original allocation, so it was 3.9 million. We have produced evaluation reports and case studies, and we've added those to our website because there's some really useful learning in there. And the fact that we were able to be quite flexible was a real plus to us. The procurement framework we created did actually allow other local authorities to procure similar programmes. So, for example, in North Essex, they used the framework that we had created to procure similar programmes. So that was a real added bonus of the programme. The ability, as I say, to be flexible was a real plus, because with national programmes, sometimes there are parameters and inflexibilities. That was an advantage, and we were able to respond to changing needs, and needs were changing obviously very quickly at that point in time. And we've also been able to extend some of the projects. So just speaking specifically about the skills programmes, because obviously those were the programmes I led on, and Jo will talk a bit about the business support. Overall, they supported nearly 1,500 people. The range of support offered included training people and supporting them into tech roles, key recruiting sectors, and basic digital training and device support, because obviously digital exclusion and digital poverty really came to the fore during COVID. So that was an area we were keen to support on. Numbers were lower than forecast originally, but not insignificant, obviously, partly because COVID, the impact on unemployment wasn't as severe as we anticipated, and partly because national government programmes came in offering similar support. So in that sense, the ability to adapt was really positive. So, for example, we were able to support underemployed people as well as unemployed people, which was really beneficial. And we found that face-to-face, as we were able to do more face-to-face, that proved particularly effective. So the programmes that did that were particularly successful. And I won't read all of these out, but I think it just makes the point that behind every one of those 1,500 people, there's an individual who had real impact on their lives through these programmes. And that's obviously the important bit. So, for example, a lady who, through her access to devices and digital training, was able to apply for interviews and secure employment. Another person who was able to change from being a care sector employee to move into the construction sector, and somebody else who went on to work at Sky in a tech role. So just three of the kind of examples of people whose lives were impacted by those programmes, and obviously that was what it was all about. I'm now going to hand over to Jo to say a little bit about the business support programmes.
Thanks, Lou. So as Lou has mentioned, there were 3 business support programmes, and the 2 bullet points on the screen represent the 2 combined, and then the visitor economy support. So resilience, startup and digital support was provided through the Starting and Succeeding in Business programme and the Adapting with Digital programme, and both of these were run by the same provider, WSX. And that in itself enabled some economies of scale in delivery. They were able to create a shared portal for both the provision of material and registration of businesses. And they were also able to adopt very quickly in-year learnings from either of their programmes. So they were able to adapt very quickly to the changing circumstances, as Lou mentions. And again, flexibility of this funding and the speed at which we could make decisions and change the criteria through our own governance processes, rather than being restricted by, say, national funding programme criteria, was absolutely key to the real success of all of this funding. So in terms of the first 2 business support programmes, they responded in year to 2 further lockdowns, new COVID variants, and then the emerging rising energy costs and inflation. So they had to pivot very quickly. And one of the immediate learnings was that, conversely to skills development, which where face-to-face was successful, SMEs really wanted on-demand learning. They wanted access 24/7 to support, so that they could work around what they were dealing with in their business as usual. So these 2 programmes quickly evolved 24/7 on-demand material and bite-sized learning, and they also increased the number of business advisors they had available, so that businesses could have a kind of more of an account management style support, where they could go away, learn at their leisure, or when in the time that they had, and then reinforce that learning with one-to-one support. Nearly 1,000 businesses and individuals engaged in these 2 schemes, and we ended up back a bit, Lou. Thanks, Lou. we ended up safeguarding and creating over 600 businesses. Another notable learning for all of the business support actually was what a difference just a small 100% grant could make to individual businesses. The first two programs averaged a grant of £1,600 per business or entrepreneur, and you can see this in the testimonials that we've now got online through the case studies and the evaluation reports. This small amount of money really did make a big difference to survival or the ability to pivot. In total, for the first two programs, we issued 279 grants from a total pot of £450,000. Second bullet point, the visitor economy. They took a slightly different, more innovative and holistic route with their business support design. They did run a grants scheme immediately as the programme was launched, and this was oversubscribed almost immediately, showing the dire need that visitor economy businesses were in at that time, having been impacted by the first lockdown and then social distancing. Their grants averaged about 2,600, but again, these small 100% grants made such a difference to their ability to pivot. What they needed was to be able to buy equipment, either to adapt to social distancing or to take their operations outside, physically outside, and also online. And so the speed at which these grants were taken up and used also not only enabled those businesses to do that, but also supported the local supply chain as well. The grant scheme was then followed up by the design of place-based campaigns. Again, these were the innovative part of the whole programme, because they drew on the experience of over 100 businesses, relevant organisations and businesses across the whole SELEP region, created a network and then designed an input to the design of the campaigns, which were taken from a pure tourist aspect, which is a more traditional approach to visitor economy campaigns, into a place-based approach. So really looking at the place, not only encouraging people to come into the place, but also encouraging people within that place to step out. They were designed to increase confidence during the pandemic and after the pandemic, to increase footfall, increase spend, and enable communities to really start to reinvigorate themselves. So there was a huge amount of learning that we got from these business support programs. Next slide, please, Lou. Overall, we found that they ended up supporting the sectors and the size of businesses that we anticipated they would. Those that we thought were really going to fall through the net of government funding, and that's what they did, and that's what our evaluations show. Most of the beneficiaries were small, micro and sole traders in the hardest hit of the sectors. As I've mentioned, learnings were around the fact that businesses want flexible support. They want to be able to work around their day job rather than to attend live webinars and courses. And I think that we'll see that trend continue now that we're out of the pandemic and moving forward in business support design. And those that were supported to pivot have reported that they have now developed new ways of operating, which they can say has led to increased sales and increased profitability, which is an excellent outcome. The visitor economy in particular have reported that once they were able to expand with the grant funding their operations outside and using online technology, they are seeing increased customer loyalty. They're seeing greater flexibility in the way that they can operate going forward, because once these purchases have been made, you know, that they have them. So what they are now seeing is they can, as we'd hoped and as we'd predicted, as the lockdown impacted the first summer season, that these visitor economy businesses with this support can extend beyond that season and be much more flexible in adverse weather conditions, etc. So what our evaluations have shown overall is that the funding has enabled businesses to continue to start, to continue to pivot and to adapt and have some very immediate impacts on their survival, but also the longevity of those businesses post-COVID. So in summary, some really great impacts on individual businesses, which I think is important to recognise, and some great learnings which we have captured in reports and case studies online. So if you go to the final slide, Lou, we would both encourage you to have a look at the evaluation reports and the case studies, particularly of the areas of your interest, and really delve into some of the detailed learning that we have now got from the investment. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you both. And it's so great to actually have a moment to reflect on some of the work that as a LEP that we're actually doing, rather than looking at how we close down, and actually to celebrate and to ensure that we are sharing that learning with others as we go forwards, as we, as things close down. So I just want to pay tribute to Joe and Louise and to all of those organisations that worked on these programmes so hard and so fast in a really crucial time. So thank you very much for that. Any comments or queries from anybody? No? So thank you very much for all of that. Do look on the website if you haven't already on some of that learning. Okay, let's move to item 6, the Growth Hub update. Joe, to you again. Thank you.
Thank you again, Sarah. So this item is to update you on the delivery of the Growth Hub service this financial year. And in particular, just give you an update on where the service stands in Greater Essex. Overall, delivery of the service is going really well this year. We remain compliant with our funding conditions, and we will do for the rest of the year. I'm confident of that. And we're also consistent again in our service across the whole CELEP region in terms of the 3 area growth hubs that operate within the hub and spoke model. And this is despite us operating for a second year running with a 50% reduction in our growth hub funding envelope. The reduction in funding and the funding cycle generally for growth hubs has had an impact on service delivery in Greater Essex this year. It's had an impact in our ability to be able to deliver a full service anyway, and we have worked phenomenally hard and at speed to make sure that the service continues year after year with an annual funding settlement. But this year, as with last year, we received our confirmation of funding very late in the day, in late March, for a 1st of November start. And we also did not receive our grant funding agreement and the terms and conditions of that money until well into June. So this resulted in Southend withdrawing as their position to host the Growth Hub service in Greater Essex. That's the Business Essex, Southend and Thurrock Growth Hub. And they wanted to limit their liabilities and the risks associated with the annual funding cycle. So we had to suspend the BEST service from the 1st of April this year. Essex County Council came forward and offered to act as the new host for the BEST service. And so CELEP and Essex County Council worked very hard and very quickly together in Q1 to set up and run a procurement for a service provider for the Greater Essex area, with the objective of having that service back up and running at the beginning of Q2. And we achieved this when we successfully procured, or I would say correctly, Essex County Council successfully procured Colbia to provide the service for the rest of this financial year. So operating for a further 9 months through to March next year. So that is the principal point of this update, is to reassure you that the BEST service is up and running, and we are now have a full complement of Growth Hub delivery hubs across the region for the rest of the year. I think it's important for board to note that, as we have said to board in previous updates on Growth Hub, the risks associated with the annual funding cycle, and in particular the lateness of funding notification from government, does cause impact the wiring behind the scenes of service delivery. A lot of work goes on behind the scenes to make sure that service is consistent and there is no break in service as far as we can possibly manage it. But it does have an impact. We expect Growth Hub funding to continue on its annual funding cycle. That is the mood music from government at the moment. And as mentioned earlier in the meeting, we await news on Growth Hub funding for 24-25. And I won't be talking in this item about Growth Hub delivery beyond this financial year, because clearly that's wrapped up in the integration plan that has already been tabled. So as it stands, that's my update, Sarah, and I'm happy to take any questions on that, but I will hand back to you now.
Thank you, Jo, and thank you to you and the team and to Essex County Council for, juggling a very difficult situation and ensuring that our businesses can get the best advice possible for their future growth. Any questions or comments from anybody? No? Okay, we're just asked to note the successful reinstatement of the Best Growth Hub and the ongoing risk to service continuity resulting from the annual funding cycle. Okay, thanks. So let's go to any other business. Is there any other business from around the room? No? Thank you. So I just want to for everybody to note that the next board meeting will be on the 8th of December at 10 o'clock. And we are intending for this meeting to be an in-person meeting. So the venue is yet to be confirmed, but if you could note that in your diary and put aside some travelling time to that meeting, that would be great. Thank you very much. And I just also want to pay tribute to you all as board members to sticking with us during this quite challenging time, to continuing to be here to ensure that we deliver the best that we possibly can over the next few months. And I just also wanted to thank particularly the federated board chairs, Liz, David, and Perry, and obviously, of course, Simon as Deputy Chair and Chair of Accountability Board, without whom my role as Chair would be so much more difficult and so much less fun. So thank you very much to you all, and I look forward to seeing you at the AGM. You now have a moment to go and make yourself a cup of coffee before the AGM. So I'll look forward to seeing you shortly on the other link. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.